Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Cash That. This is your host, Joe Dellera, and welcome to the worst contracts, the second part of the Money series. And I am once again joined by Brandon Anderson today. But if you haven't, be sure to like, subscribe, rate, review. If you're on YouTube, definitely subscribe to this. If you're on Spotify, Apple, whatever, give us a nice review. Write some comments. At least give us 5 stars because, I think that we are making you a couple dollars for you. All right, so for those of you that are watching on video, we've changed clothes, and the biggest thing here is that the Joel Embiid news just broke, and we recorded the worst contracts in the NBA episode before, and the Joel Embiid news broke, and we were like, we have to record. So Brandon and I were back, and this is coming in before the rest of the episode. I'm interjecting this in front. You can infer the rest of the episode from what we're talking about here. But Brandon, oh my God. Like, this is a monster deal for one of the literal, there's no debating it. Joel Embiid is one of the best players in the NBA. This contract, though, do we have to do this? What are we doing here? What's happening?
It's truly wild. Look, I thought until he got injured last season, and you know how I feel about Joel Embiid, I thought he legit was earning the MVP and the rightful MVP of the season. That's how good he was playing finally. I never had said that before about him. That's how good he is. In theory, that player theoretically can't be a bad contract. You should be able to just give them any amount of money that they want. And in the NBA, most max contracts for elite players are bargains. That's why we didn't include them on our best contracts list coming up the next time you listen, because it's a cheat code. You can only pay Nikola Jokic so much. And so then by definition, we're creating, a cap on it and creating a bargain. Problem is, Joel Embiid is 30 and turns 31 this season, I believe. I remember right. And historically in the NBA, typically 30 is the big drop-off for injuries for big men. And it's not like Joel Embiid has been an absolute beacon of health for his career. We are not wishing injury upon anyone. I like to see good players play basketball. I hope Joel Embiid plays another decade of healthy basketball. However, we haven't gotten any full seasons of Joel Embiid healthy, really ever. The closest we got was the MVP season, but even there, we definitely have not gotten postseasons of healthy Joel Embiid. And like it or not, whether the player is awesome or not, which Joel Embiid is, you have to factor in availability and age and durability into the contract conversation. And unavoidably, that's where we get into trouble here. So here's the numbers. So Embiid was already signed for about $51 million this year, $55 million next year. Then there was a 30-year option for just under $60 million.
He was going to opt out.
Which he's going to opt out of in all likelihood. Barring his knees exploding by then, he was going to opt out of and then sign a big new contract, which pretty much would have been these dollar amounts, maybe a little bit more. So in theory, they probably save a few million that year because now that option disappeared and replaced by an actual contract for about the same amount, $60 million, then another 64, then a new option, which is 5 seasons out from now, Joe, for $69 million, age 36 season. He's not opting out of that one. You're getting that money.
What are the odds that you put? What would be the odds that you would have to put for him to opt out? How many zeros on the end of the plus 100?
I mean, I don't know if it's quite that long necessarily. Again, we hope he opts out because opting out means he's still healthy enough that he thinks he can get one more big contract in. So then you opt out the year early, you sign the contract, especially if you're a 34, 35-year-old big man. You opt out, you lock in the money while you can. We hope. I cannot get there, even in my best versions of expecting what he can be. Here's the problem. We can't even assume he's an MVP player right now. We saw him play in the playoffs and fall apart with a whole bunch of injury stuff. And I know they're unrelated things, but they're still happening. Then we saw a couple months off, and we saw him play in the Olympics. And Joe, I got to tell you, he did not look like an MVP in the Olympics. And I'm ripping on the guy. He didn't look healthy. He did not move well. He didn't look ready to go. Maybe that's because, like, oh, it's the off season. He's healing. Well, it's the off season for all the guys. Like, nobody else looked the way Joel Embiid looked out there, to where he was a detriment to the team for most of the minutes that he was playing. It was like you could do the plus minus real easy. And I know that's a crappy way to do NBA, but it was pretty clear with Embiid on and Embiid off how things were going most of our games. Even the games like against Jokic are the ones where we, ostensibly needed Embiid for. So now we have a past 30 big man with a history of injuries who, before even beginning this contract, which is effectively now a 5-year, $300 million contract, once the extension is added on, keeping the option. $300 million. He is now a top 5 all-time salary in NBA history, assuming this all comes through here, which NBA salaries are guaranteed. So the problem is, even right now, so he's making $51 million this year. Unquestionably, you love that. You want that. Like, you pay Joel Embiid this season, even with the question marks, you pay him $51 million every time, no matter what. Even if you're assuming you might be getting the Olympic version that's banged up, and maybe you never get whole again, and you only get him for 55 games and hope you get the playoffs, he's still that good. You still pay him $51 million without thinking twice. The problem is, it keeps going up, and all the problems we're talking about keep going to the negative side of the equation. So and that's where we're running into huge trouble.
So here's the question that I have, because I do have some Philly fans, including my buddy Vinny Oliva, loves this stuff. He's always like, Brandon hates Joel. And so
I said lots of nice things just then about Joel.
No, you did. And this hate him, though. This is really the question that I have. Because Joel is, from when you hear the rest of this list come out after, there is nobody on par with Joel Embiid. When you hear this, right, what is the actual, like, what do you think the actual value is? Like, if you could say, like, for 1 year, like, regardless of cap, regardless of whatever, like, if you could sign a potential MVP candidate, what is the dollar amount that you attribute to a guy like Joel Embiid? Because realistically, like, besides Jokic, it's Embiid. So it's like, what would, if you could pay 1 year, if you said, like, I'm starting a year, I have to win a title this year, and I can get an MVP guy, Joel Embiid, like, you have to say, like, he's number 2. He's been,
and frankly, to say it differently, what I said earlier, if you go by like November last season, where things were at their peak, he's 1B, or you could argue at that time 1A. I'm still going to keep 1B. I'm not going to go that far. But here's the problem. So in my notes for salary, like when I do the salary of what I think each player should be making based on the cap rules, like Jokic should be making $100 million or whatever, like some egregious number, but we can't give him that. So I have Jokic as worth $65 million plus in my formula. I just have a plus at the end of it. Like, I don't really know. He's awesome. It's at least that much. No one else is that amount. The problem is that, like it or not, Nikola Jokic has proven so far to be durable and dependable. So if I'm signing 1 year of Jokic, I'm getting 65, 70, 75 games of Jokic and probably a pretty healthy version in the playoffs. There's no logical reason to expect that sentence, what I just said, to be true of Joel Embiid. So I can't give him the same amount. I can't. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's not how it goes. So here's what I did. I think if you think last year's version of Embiid is what we get again, an MVP type version that hopefully stays mostly healthy and hopefully is healthy in the playoffs, the best case scenario, in my opinion, I'd call that a $60 million player. That's really good. That's a lot of dollars. A bargain this year. It's a lot of money, right? I'd retire. I'm good. I'm good with that one. So here's what I did. Normally on these contracts, things are pretty straightforward. It's not an all-world possible best player in the world, dude. It's not crazy amounts of money. And it's also not like this huge question mark of injuries and aging. Yeah. So normally I'm just like, all right, you're worth this amount this year, this amount next year. I kind of lay it all out, add it up. I do my marginal cost thing. With Embiid, I got complex. I made 4 different versions of contracts that he should be. So I have the version, the best case scenario version, the if he's still elite right now, the best version we think, I have him as worth, and now it should be going up a little bit each year because the salary cap's going up, but I have to factor in some amount of aging. So I have it slightly going down each year because we've seen the aging and injuries already. I have to factor that in, even in the best scenario. So I have him worth 60 million this year. Then it goes 55, 50, 40, 40. So that contract, the best case scenario contract that I have for Embiid, is a 5-year, $245 million deal. That's the best scenario, and he got 5 years, $300 million. So in our best case scenario, we're still a $55 million marginal value that we were giving up over 5 years, and it's an MVP player, so you might make that sacrifice.
And I think the problem is that the way the contract is loaded, obviously, like the problem with NBA contracts, and honestly most contracts, and when we talked about the hidden details in the last episode, we talked about how Miles Bridges, for example, was a declining contract. This is the opposite. So, and you have the opposite on a player that's not projected normally to age well. So, like, it'd be one thing if you said, hey, you're paying Embiid $70 million this year, and then the last year you're paying him 50. And you could kind of wrap your head around it and be like, all right, like,
yeah, it's like a $5 or $10 million tax each year along the way, but at least the contract is like declining the way Embiid should be also, and you can live with it because you only get one Joel Embiid. You pay it and you go for the title.
Yeah, like he's realistically he's a surefire Hall of Famer. Like that's the way the NBA is. So he's a Hall of Fame player, and you expect his production to decline. The problem is that the contract isn't, and that's realistically what makes it a bad contract.
For sure.
Your contract doesn't decline. So when you're in this scenario, and when you look at like the rest of the list that we've constructed, right? Like it's a little bit of a teaser right now. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but like I don't see any way to have Embiid as not like the fourth at a minimum worst contract in the NBA.
Yeah, I think that's the spot where I put this. So the deal that I have as a fair value deal for Joel Embiid is I have him as 5 years, $193 million. And what I did was I did 4 formulas. I did the elite formula. That's the one I kind of spelled out for you already. I did the opposite. I did what if he's already a little bit washed and he just gets a little worth from there. That contract is a 5-year, $160 million deal. In that scenario where he's already a little bit washed, never gets better, you are having $140 million sacrificed marginal value over the contract. So I did that. I did a couple more median, more likely outcomes, average all together. He should be getting from my contract effectively $100 million less is the marginal value cost there. So it's a lot of money. Now, in our worst contracts, as you'll hear as you listen to the rest of the episode, there's only one guy on my list who is higher than $100 million of marginal cost. I won't tell you who. You'll find out who if you listen last year. It's a name you're familiar with. There's 2 guys right behind that I have as $85 million marginal value. The difference is neither of those dudes is winning the MVP or coming anywhere close to the conversation of MVP. And there's no title equity with these guys either. With Joel Embiid, you want to win a championship. Like, that's the thing that we're doing here. You got PG, you got Max, you got the guys. I think Philadelphia should feel very good about their chances. I think at the very least, in the next couple of years, they get at least one healthy run at a title with Embiid, with PG healthy. We hope, and that makes it worth it. So I make this the 4th worst contract on the list. And like, quite frankly, I'm not even really sure Philadelphia would disagree a whole lot with it. They're just like, doesn't matter. We got to keep our star healthy. We got to keep everyone healthy. We'll deal with the $64 and $69 million later. It's very likely going to be bad. I don't think they're blind about this. They know, fans know. Right now, it's fine. He's happy. He's healthy. He's here. We got a title shot. And look, if the Sixers win a title in the next 3 years of the deal, and then have to pay $133 million for Joel Embiid for 2 years after that, while he sits on the sidelines and plays 0 games, doesn't matter. Don't care. It was worth it. It doesn't matter. But that's the exercise, is worst contracts. I think it has to be, considering the risk and the value and just the sheer amount of money, has to be on the list. But look, you can still play like an MVP and still win a title. It's not Joel Embiid hate, it's a contract hate. And
Yeah,
frankly, my biggest problem is why? Like, why did we do this? We had him under the contract for 2/3 more years. And, like, the answer is why is because Joel wanted it, and you got to keep your players happy. But I don't know.
exactly. And I think that's the biggest thing, because it's like he had the scenario where everybody knows it's not like NBA contracts are weird because people don't talk about them too much, but then it's just like all of a sudden it's like, hey, he could have opted out, he got extended, and that's like what really happened here, where it's like Joel, he had like one more year under contract than a player option, but like Joel's gonna opt out, like he's too good.
Yeah.
And he's also not like old enough yet where you're like, like we don't want that. We don't want that. It's still Joel Embiid, MVP candidate every year. Like he's literally been an MVP candidate for the past 3 years. Like he's going to get paid wherever he wants to get paid.
Yeah.
So it does create like a really fascinating scenario with this entire dialogue. And when you listen to the rest of the episode, and you listen to the people that are involved in the top 10 worst contracts, there is no one else. There is no one else that has a title equity of Joel Embiid. Just period.
Yep.
But the concern with Joel is that like he's older and he's had a lot of injury risk. So when you couple those two things and you're like, hey, like, we can all agree this isn't a good deal, but at the end of the day, if we do win a title, that's the only thing that really matters. And it's a really big gamble. It's a really big gamble. But when you have organizations and you have like GMs and ownership and whatever, like Morey, whatever, who's played like Harden ball, Chris Paul, like whatever. And then like you're in this scenario and you're like, hey, I gotta get a chip. I gotta get one. I need a title. Joel Embiid is about as good as you're gonna get in this scenario. Like it's hard to chalk up a better scenario for any ownership group.
Yeah, I mean, look, put differently, again, without naming too many names here, Nikola Jokic not on our worst contracts list. Some of his teammates, though, are going to be in the conversation, and it's a little different because you're not paying the absolute superstar the amount, but it's kind of the same thing. You want to win a title, pay your guys. Guess what? Another little slight spoiler. There's a guy on the defending champions on our worst contracts list because you got to pay to win, and championship rosters cost a lot of money, and you deal with it, and you deal with the consequences later. And especially in today's NBA, like you're about to hear 45 minutes of bashing on some of these contracts of mostly great players. I have to admit, Joe, I'm a little sad. This is just a direct spoiler. I'm a little sad that Patrick Williams is falling out of the top 10. His best accomplishment of his career. Like this was probably going in his Wikipedia, and now he's out. He got bumped off the list because Joel Embiid had to make an extra couple $100 million. Sorry for that, Patrick Williams. Most of the names on the list are stars. Really, really good players. Really, really good players can still be overpaid, and sometimes even by the very best teams. And this is just a scenario where it's kind of checks all the boxes. He is all the things. He is great. He is elite. He is an MVP player. I hope he stays healthy. I would love to see him and Nikola Jokic play in the finals. That would be entertaining. I would like to see it. That's different than the contract. The contract stuff is what it is. This is a rough one. It's also very likely one that as we do this series years down the road, probably only moves up the list, because that's the whole point, is that this is not going to age well in all likelihood. But you know what? I remember a few years ago I did this, and I had Steph Curry on the list of bad contracts. Not going to age well. Turns out I'd take the contract and have him for all those years. Turns out maybe I shouldn't be the NBA GM. Got to pay these dudes sometimes. James Harden often showed up on my list. Didn't think he'd age well. He hasn't really aged that well. Turns out he's still valuable enough and pretty good enough that he's been worth the contract all along. So, I wouldn't go give James Harden this contract. That would not go well. I wouldn't want to give him the Joel Embiid deal 4 or 5 years ago. I'd give it to him, and that's just the cost of doing business. So, we're ripping on the contract. We're not ripping on the player. I'm happy to rip on Joel Embiid some other time. Bring me back on, and we'll do it.
No, it really is a fascinating deal. It's a massive extension. And, credit to Joel, credit to Maury. Like, this is great if you're a Philadelphia fan, you should be really excited because you should be excited about the future. You should be excited about the fact that you have Joel, All George, Tyrese Maxey, and then like all the host of auxiliary players, whatever. Like, and you got that locked in. But at the end of the day, it's like you generally have to be concerned about the fact that, like, hey, our window is maybe 2-3 years, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
And that's part of why the contract's so bad. But look, we're going to get into the rest of the top 10 worst contracts starting right now. But Brandon, how you doing? It's good to have you back.
I'm doing well. I'm enjoying the Money series, and I'm excited. This is my favorite one of the Money series. I just get to rip on dudes for the next half an hour of the worst contracts in the league. My favorite. Let's hate on guys.
I know this is Brandon's favorite episode, most controversial. It always happens. We're gonna do is we are gonna talk through. It's a top 10 list of the worst, so top 10, bottom 10, however you want to call it. But there are, as you guys could imagine, Brandon has a litany of players that like didn't quite make the cut. So tell me about, like, just list these ones off real quick. Who are your guys that you like thought about and you're like, like we're just not there on those guys?
Yeah, just like some of the names I think you expect to hear on a list like this. Tyler Hero comes to mind. Jeremy Grant. Of course, I have to say Dylan Brooks. Like, if I want to be a hater for a podcast, I have to name Dylan Brooks. Andrew Wiggins, Kyle Kuzma. I don't want these contracts on my team. I do not need them around. I think the difference here is that these are not my top 10 deals because they're usually, most of these are only like 3-year deals. We've got 4 years and 5-year deals, even 6 on some of these guys. The longer a deal is, the more long-term damaging it can be to your team where you're stuck with it. And frankly, they're just our worst deals. Like, there are more expensive deals out there too. And to me, these guys are not deals you want, but they're not deals that necessarily cripple your team. You can get out of these contracts if you need to, and we've seen teams do that. There are more damaging contracts where it's like, okay, you've really cornered your team in. You're stuck here. And this list is going to be controversial because there are good players on this list. Most of the players in my top 10 are good quality players. They're all better than Tyler Hero and Kyle Kuzma and Dylan Brooks. Well, the top 8. The number 9 and 10 are not better. The top 8 are all better, but you still, like, there are rules. You only get so much money. That's the point of this exercise, is not to dump on players. Like, of course, my evaluation of these guys is going to factor in here, but you only get so much salary cap and the way you can build your team. And I think that's interesting because as bettors, like, we have to analyze what your team's future is and where you're going. And that's why this stuff matters to me. So all of those guys, the Zeke Najis and Isaiah Stewarts of the world that, like, frankly, I would pay the minimum. And then they're like, oh, you're just eating up $8 million of space on a team that we could have signed KCP. Nope. Had to get Zeke Naji his dollars this year. Those are those guys. They're bad deals that we got bigger fish to fry.
Exactly. And I think the point, it's important for the listeners to understand too. We're talking about these deals in terms of like how bad they are. A lot of it goes into the team building aspect of it. And like, what does having this type of contract do to you? Like, how badly does it hamstring you moving forward? And, one of the things that people ask, and like they asked, it was a common question when this podcast came out last year, we did last year's rankings, was with some of these deals, like, people bring up this primary point and says like, well, like, they have to, like, they can't replace that player for X reason, right? Or like whatever the reason is, right? What are your thoughts on that from like a team building perspective? And could any of these guys become a good contract or even like just kind of become like a net neutral contract when you're looking at the way that you structured this list?
Yeah, I mean, the contracts, like, the reason we do this every year is because the stuff does change. And like, sometimes a guy on this list suddenly like takes a leap in play and becomes a neutral value or even a positive value deal. I don't know that I've had a player go from my top 10 to bottom 10 or vice versa. Like, that'd be a pretty dramatic swing. But certainly, like, an easy example, Rudy Gobert is not on my list of worst contracts this year. He's not even in my honorable mentions of worst contracts. He's worth the contract. He looked like he was slipping off. Suddenly you have this like generationally great defense that he wins Defensive Player of the Year. And like his buddy on the Timberwolves will make my list still. but he's not on the list this year. You can earn your way off of this with better play. I think the other question is interesting of like, do you have to pay a guy? And I honestly, I think that's a lie. Like, I think that is a media lie that teams are selling us, and we've just kind of accepted as fans that, oh, we what else could we do? We had to do like, okay, we talked in the first part of the series about like Sam Presti and Daryl Morey and these guys who know
Yeah.
what they're doing. Ain't nobody telling them how to do anything. They're gonna do the deal that helps their team out, and if it's not the right deal, they either won't do the deal or they will do it and then trade the guy very quickly so they don't get stuck with the deal. Like, you don't have to do anything in the NBA. And if you are signing a deal that's too expensive to not be a title contender, you're just hurting your team in the long run. Like, nobody is forcing you to do that as the GM of the deal. There are ways around it. Like, when you come to negotiating is for two people. Like, that's same for me or you are at our jobs. Anyone listening, we all negotiate. We negotiate in our relationships. We negotiate at work. Like, you get to both sides get to do the thing. I don't accept that. Like, oh, well, you just had to pay them. What choice do you have? We kind of even said that with OG Anunoby, and we'll get to him. Spoiler. But like, oh, well, the Knicks traded for him and paid so much, you got to keep him. Okay, well, when you traded for him, you had to know this was coming. His deal is up. Like, you
Yeah.
knew this is where this is going to go. So then, like, you kind of go in with that mindset. You talk that deal before you even make the trade in the first place to know where it's going. Like, no one's forcing you to do anything. I know this is an idealistic thing for me to say. I can hear, like, Matt Moore screaming in my ears, like, no, this is not how it works. You got to pay the guys. Players get their money. But, like, the good teams consistently don't do this, with one important exception we'll get to it near the end of our list today. But I think it's not shocking which teams show up on this list, and a lot of times it is the mid-market teams, the teams that gotta pay their guy or we're just gonna lose them and have nobody. I don't accept that. Like, there are other mid-market teams like Oklahoma City, easy example, not a big market. They seem to do just fine taking care of their guys, paying their guys, getting plenty of loyalty from their players. I don't know. Maybe that's a cop-out answer, but I don't buy it.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more like the other way to a degree, because I do think that like when you have situations where players have windows or like teams have windows to maybe try to win, I can understand why you would overpay somebody, because you're like, look, we don't care about years 4 and 5 on this deal. Like, we need years 1 and 2 for sure, maybe year 3, because we're trying to win a ring. We're trying to win a title. And I can kind of understand it from that perspective, because you go like, look, like when you factor in that cost, like if you say like, hey, like, yeah, like we do think we're overpaying, but we also think that like we're going to get extra value out of this guy for this year because like we need him. Like, we want to go win a title. The banners hang forever. You have the title forever. I think that changes the analysis for some of these teams. And I think it also makes some of these other contracts so much worse, because you look at them and you're like, oh, you aren't contending. like you can't contend. So I think that makes some of the other contracts worse, whereas other ones you're like, all right, I get it. I think it's an overpay, but like I'm okay with it, especially as a fan. You can say like you're okay with it because you're like, I think it just makes the team a lot better right now in our window.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us to this list of honorable mention contracts that you have, because there's 4 players in there. I'm going to say one of them is like on there, and it's not really his fault, I don't think. So you've got these 4. Tell me about who was on your honorable mention list, and I'll tell you which one I'm like, I don't think it was his fault too bad that he's on this list.
Fair. Okay. So I guess really a dishonorable mention list. Like, nobody
Yeah.
really wants to be nominated for the top 10, bottom 10 worst contracts. So Darius Garland, 4 years, $163 million. Honestly, I think I liked his contract when it came out. He just has really fallen off. So that's,
Yeah.
like, again, this is the evaluation thing. Domantas Sabonis, 4 years, $186 million. Paul George, the big contract he just got this summer, 4 years, $211 million. That's a lot of dollars for an older player. Player option on the end that very likely he will keep. Then MPJ, 3 years, $115 million, and a bonus one for you, because I'd made this list before, and then we had to add in some guys. Jamal Murray, second Nugget on the honorable mentions, 5 years, $246 million on his deal right now. So those are the 5 honorable mentions. Jamal, I think if I had done this before, might have snuck onto my list. but I did this in July, so he lucked out this time. Who's the name that you feel like is unfair to these 5?
I think it's Garland, and it's mainly because I think that he's on the list because I thought the deal was good when he got it too.
Yeah.
And I think that just bringing in Donovan Mitchell has just been a disaster for Cleveland.
Yeah.
Like not for Cleveland, but like for Garland in particular. Like it's been an unmitigated disaster, I think. Like it's just completely stifled his growth. And like maybe like, yeah, sure, like Garland should be able to play alongside another guard, but you have 2 small guards trying to really play like the same role, and Mitchell's just better. Like it is what it is. Mitchell's better, but also Garland, I think maybe if he had runway, maybe I don't know if he could have gotten to where Mitchell is, but maybe he's a lot better and is actually like kind of overperforming this contract. The other guys, I think valid in terms of just like it's a lot of money. Like it's a lot of money for these guys where they're at.
Yeah. Well, and then worrisome on the Nuggets, too, that we're mentioning Jamal Murray and MPJ. I already mentioned Zeke Naji as like a normal growth sort of deal.
Yeah.
It's a lot of bad money going out. And like, look, I love Jamal Murray. I really like MPJ. I like rooting for this team. I want them to stay together. They're not. They already just lost KCP, who I think is not really as valuable as folks make him out to be, but still is clearly on that team. Their 5-man stats is very clear how good he's been in that unit with Jokic. And like Jokic is always going to be more valuable any contract you can give him, but there's only so much ground you can make up when you are just taking on a lot of risk. Like there's a lot of risk on the MPJ deal. I think him getting paid that much is part of what made Jamal get so much. And Aaron Gordon's on his last year. He's going to be probably maybe end up on this list also before too long.
Yeah.
Like again, that is a, you know what, we'll deal with that. We got Jokic in his prime. Let's win a title. I can stomach these deals. Like, you got to keep Jamal. You got to have, I don't know if you got to have MPJ. I think that I'd rather see him in a trade. You got to keep Aaron Gordon for sure. Paul George, the Sixers basically traded James Harden for Paul George. Like, they traded him for salary room. They used the room on Paul George. PG is getting that money elsewhere. So I get it. Like, that's how these deals work. That's how the NBA works. You do have to pay at some point. That's what the cap is for. But it's a lot of money for guys who it seems great right now, but like, put it this way, those names are only moving one direction on this list. Like 2 years from now, these deals are only going to age poorly in all likelihood as they age a little further, get some injuries a little further. A lot of these guys are injury prone already. This contract can only get worse from there. I feel like that's the problem.
Yeah. So at least these guys, if you do look at this part of the list, you're like, well, they're all good. So it's not like you're in a situation where you're like at our 9-10 part of the list. Tell me, let's group these 2 guys together because I think that we look at these contracts and we're both like, yeah, they're fucking cheeks. So tell me about who you have at 9 and 10.
Yeah, my guy Patrick Williams, Chicago's bright hope in the future. 5 years, $90 million. What in the world are we doing? Like, so the way I do this is I value what I think the contract should be in a fair market pricing based on my evaluation of the player and just on what the salary cap looks like. And then I call you a marginal value. So I think Patrick Williams for 5 years should be making maybe $30 to $60 million, which means his marginal cost to the team is $30 or $60 million out of the 90 that should be going elsewhere. And I have in the notes parentheses 90 million. Like, I don't know if Patrick Williams is an NBA player. Like, maybe he's like a rotation guy. He's not a starter. He has not been a starter. We have 4 years of him not being a starter caliber and not even really developing that much, frankly, so far. The defense is nice. We can't do anything on offense right now. Jordan Poole, opposite. 3 years, 95 million. I have him as a marginal cost of 50 million. And frankly, I think I'm being kind there because that's projecting him to not be literally the worst starter in the league, which is what I think he was last year.
Yeah.
He was my LVP when I did that listing.
He was so bad.
All offense, no defense. He's great for the Wizards if they want to tank and get a high draft pick. He's their number one valuable player from that aspect. We don't need to talk much more about them. Patrick Williams and Jordan Poole, 10th and 9th on the worst contracts.
Yeah, they're both players that you're just like, I could leave them on the fantasy waiver wire, let alone like the real waiver wire. So it's rough out there. Now, I think once we start getting to 8, like we are now in a realm of players where you're just like, this dude's really good. But like, are they that good? And I think the name that you have at 8 is an interesting one, especially I think especially after the summer that he had. So who do you have at number 8 here in this part of the bracket here?
Yeah, I'm gonna actually do 8 and 7 together because I think that they're kind of similarly like eyebrows will raise at these names, and certainly there's some player evaluation here. But my guys 8 and 7. And number 8 on my list is Devin Booker. 4 years, $220 million. That's $55 million a year. And then fresh off an extension this summer, also an Olympian, also a guy that we saw a lot of. Number 7 is Bam Adebayo. 5 years, $235 million now. Player option in the last year, but for an undersized center, I fully expect him to pick that option up. I've got both of these guys as a marginal cost of $50 million over the life of the deal. So in Booker's case, that's like $12 million a year. In Bam's case, $11 million a year for 5 years out. And frankly, in Bam's case, the reason he's higher on the list is I think the deal gets progressively significantly worse as it gets older because the dollars go up a lot while his value is clearly going down. Now, look, they were both really good on the Olympics team. Like, they were genuinely, clearly good. They played their role. They did what was asked of them. I think Booker especially was fantastic at that, while we had other guys, Jason Tatum, not even getting minutes on the roster because Booker was doing what he couldn't. These are guys who we treat as upper echelon elite superstars, who these deals are treating as that. They're not that. They just aren't. We have a lot of data that shows to us now that they are, frankly, they're not all NBA players. They're very good players who are not quite top 15 players. That's fine. You're great. I really like you. I just don't want you to be making $50 million a year because I can't build a winning team around that.
Yeah, I think the issue with Bam, I'll talk about Bam first, is number one, it's a year longer. So that makes a huge difference. They're about the same age. Booker's got like almost a year on Bam, so it kind of evens out in that regard. But Bam clearly has an offensive ceiling. And like we saw him like Bamonte shooting some threes, it was fun. But like that's just not really part of his game. And when you look at the way Miami is kind of structured, I think Bam is awesome. But like I don't see the upper ceiling in terms of offense. And then the defense is interesting because like Bam is looked at as like the best defensive player in the NBA, and I don't know if I agree with that.
No.
We don't see Miami like consistently with a top 3 defense that's led by Bam, and like you can say like, oh well, like somebody was hurt, this, that, like the other thing. These guys that like continuously win defensive player of the year are able to literally anchor like number 1 defenses, and it doesn't matter who the fuck is around them. Like even Rudy Gobert, who was now off this list, Timberwolves have some better pieces, but like Towns is not a good defensive player. Conley at this stage of his career is not a good defensive player. And Minnesota had like an elite defense. Obviously, you have McDaniels, you have Anthony Edwards, but some of that on-ball defense I think is a little bit overrated. And that's like it's like an eye test thing, right? Whereas the advanced metrics say like, well, like Bam isn't there. Like he's not there. He hasn't been able to elevate Miami to that level on the defensive side. So when you have a guy that's like a little bit more limited that relies on defense through like realistically athleticism, this deal is only going to get worse as he gets a little bit older. For a guy like Booker, though, my only pushback, and I think it's because there's another Phoenix Sun on this list, is that I'm more willing to pay Booker based on what we can see offensively. And I feel like we didn't really get to see. I thought we were going to see it where without Chris Paul, he like got to lead an offense and like he was the distributor. He was like doing a little bit more. And because of the construct of what Phoenix did, we're not really getting that. So I do think that he's got a little bit more like ceiling that he could get to. But like we're talking about a guy that's 28. So not that 28's old, but it's like how much more are we going to see as, you know, like maybe the speed isn't there, or maybe he gets hurt a little bit more. Like what's the situation? So I can understand how you got both these guys here. I'm less critical of Booker, I think, though, than Bam.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's a fair point that, like, frankly, like, take Devin Booker and sub him in for Jalen Brunson, for example, in New York, and give him like more of the ball, running the show, and being kind of the lead guy on the offense rather than one of three guys. I think I probably feel okay with this deal at that point, and maybe it's even a positive value deal. So I try to do these kind of agnostic to team situation of just what is the deal.
Yeah.
And I think this is one where you're right, where another guy coming up on the list hurts his value here. That said, I have long been a Devin Booker skeptic. He has won me over as a good, valuable player. And I've tried a couple of times. Like I remember last summer, a year ago, me, you, and Jim Turvey in our group chat, we were talking about like I moved Booker for the first time ever into my top 15 NBA list. Like we were ranking guys and he was lighting the Nets on fire for a couple of rounds in the playoffs. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's here. Like he's finally doing the thing that we've treated him to be this entire time. He just doesn't do it long enough. Like he doesn't, I want that leap to be there. I really like him. He's really won me over, but he hasn't quite got there yet. I even on the podcast Matt Moore and I did at Buckets on MVP Talk, I gave out Booker as like a slight value as a 120 to 1 MVP player. I think if you look at the like, well, who could be the case? Who could be the Jason Tatum case of this team as a 1 seed on a really good team, and this is just the best player on the team, and especially if Kevin Durant misses a little time and Booker carries them for a while, which I think he could do. I think he's good enough to do that. And like frankly, with Durant out of the way, maybe that's his chance to step into the bigger role that he needs. I could see that there. I don't think he's going to win it. I just don't think he's 120 to 1 not going to win it. I think he probably should be like half that price or something. So yeah, I think between these guys, easily I could see Booker earning his way off the list, especially out of my entire top 10. He, I think, is the guy who could most easily not deserve to be on this top 10, bottom 10 contracts list.
Yeah, I think so too. Now the next guy is really like, it's a different scenario, right? Because and he's really in a tier of his own. And we've alluded to talking about this player. It pains me a little bit to talk about this player, but you've got OG Anunoby at number 6 on your list. I've talked about the fact that I think it is a little bit of an overpay, but tell me what your thoughts are on this guy who, all defense, but hurt a lot, big contract, a lot of money.
Lots of money, and I mean that's the problem at the end of the day. It's a ton of dollars, 5 years, $213 million. There's a player option on that, but I'm assuming that's an option he's going to pick up considering how much money it is. And I think too, like, look, it's really hard to properly value defensive guys. I think that's part of the problem with Bam Adebayo that we just talked about. But I think that's the problem here with OG also. And like you just had this on the last episode we just recorded. Like if they're going to play him like somewhat at the 5 and maybe he actually is deployed as this like center of your defense, maybe he can prove this wrong a little bit and actually show that value. But if he is, quote, just a wing defender, which is what he's been for his career so far, you just can only have so much defensive value there. And the offensive value has not been that great. So like to me, this starts with, I go at the end of the year, I rank all the players and like basically everybody in the NBA, certainly all the starters. And like I know we do first team, second team, third team all NBA. I do 1 to 30. I literally rank every player and make my all NBA. Like I have a 12th team all NBA list, etc. I have OG Anunoby from just this last season, the 14th team all NBA. And like that is a shocking number to hear, I think. But the advanced numbers just never really stick out. He also has significant health issues where he like never seems to play a big amount of games. And he just doesn't really do a lot offensively. Like he had a negative offensive BPM, EPM this year. And so you just, it's somewhat similar to the Bam Adebayo thing. Like you can't get paid this much money unless you were a world changer on defense, which he isn't. He's very, very good, but not quite that level. And then you're just not contributing enough offensively. It's not a 50-50 game. Offense is more valuable than defense by a good margin, probably at least double, I would say. So it's just, again, I like him. I like the guy. I want good things for him. It's a lot of dollars. It is just outside the top 5. It's a deal that they can afford because of Jalen Brunson, the sacrifice he made. And like, if you're the Knicks, of course, like this was the deal. Again, you had to make it, right? Because they traded for him. They have to pay him. They got to keep him after that. I have a marginal cost of over $60 million to the team. So it's just, you're sacrificing a lot to do that.
Yeah. to me, like, and part of why I think this is such an interesting conversation around OG is that, and why I think as a Knicks fan, I'm like fine with the deal is because I thought that they were overpaying Barrett and they were gonna have to overpay quickly. So, and that was what the scenario, that was kind of the way it was shaping up. So I was like, when I looked at it, I was like, well, if you really are like swapping essentially, like, because Quickly got paid, like, so Quickly got paid and then Barrett they already paid. So it's like if you combine those two and you're like, all right, well, like they both had roadblocks. Like Barrett from a usage perspective was never really going to get it in New York because you're behind Brunson and Randall. And then Quickly is literally playing behind Brunson. It's like you're overpaying for these guys that like could never really reach the potential that they wanted. And then you have a guy like OG who, when he did join the Knicks, was incredible until like his hamstring fucking exploded in the playoffs, right? But like he fits the construct of the team that they wanted to build. So like, and I don't mind it, like if you think it, but it's the framing of it, right? It's not in a vacuum. Yeah. And for New York, you're saying like, all right, well, we don't care that we overpaid him because we were definitely overpaying Quickly and Barrett. So, and OG kind of fits the team a little bit better. And like we used all these assets to go and get him, but it doesn't change the fact that like in a vacuum, like, yeah, like you paid him a little too much. I thought when they got him, I was thinking, and it actually aligns almost exactly with the numbers that you've got. I thought he was going to sign like a 5-year, $150 million deal. Mm-hmm. And that would have been great. You look at that and you're like, perfect. We think that you fit the team perfectly. You're about a net neutral in terms of like the value or like the marginal value, the way that you've got it calculated. But when you see 5 years, 213, that really does hamstring the Knicks. And that was basically all the value back from the Jalen Brunson deal. So it does kind of change the analysis, change the nexus of what you're looking at for OG Anunoby.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I have too much more to add. So I'm going to move us forward to my next two guys on the list. I'm going to put together here because I think they're kind of a similar case. So 5 and 4, we're in the top 5 now. This next one pains me. They both pain me in different ways. A personal favorite, and a guy I would not want to put on this list, but he's got to be here. Number 5 is Damian Lillard. 3 years, $162 million with a player option on there that I'm assuming is probably going to pick up. And then similarly, different sort of pain as my local Chicago Bulls team here. Zach LaVine, number 4 on the list, 3 years, $138 million, again, with a player option on the list. So these are guys that are either like 3 spots too high on the list or shouldn't be on the list at all, and I don't really know which. And the problem is we don't know what version that we're getting of the guys here. Now, I think Zach's going to have a better season this year, honestly. I think having DeMar off the team, assuming Zach stays healthy, I have no idea. We don't know about his health. Like, this could just go very badly if the health is just, the knee is shot and can't do anymore. Assuming that's still okay, I think he's going to prove more valuable and look good again, and I hope that makes him a candidate for the Bulls to trade him for value where he isn't really value right now. I think more of the ball and less DeMar is going to make him better, probably a little bit better spacing there this year as well. Dame is tough, man. 3 years, $162 million. Like, if Dame is Dame, sign me up. I don't need any convincing. This might have a 0 marginal cost. I think it could have like $100 million of cost if Dame is what we saw last year, and that wasn't just maybe being a little out of shape and the offseason trade drama and a new team and 2 different coaches. Like, there's a lot of reasons that reasonably Dame wasn't himself last year. We're now on 3 years where Dame has been not that great in 2 of the 3, for 2 entire seasons of the 3, and then really super awesome in the 3rd one. Milwaukee has to take the chance because, again, this is a had-to sort of thing. They had to make the move, I guess, and I guess move on from Jrue Holiday. I wonder what he's doing these days. Don't know if he's won any more rings or gold medals since then. But, like, they needed somebody to be the guy next to Giannis, and this is the contract that they bring in. But it's basically like $50, almost $60 million a year, that final option, age 36, for a guy that has had a lot of injuries the last few years, that, like, frankly, since the last Olympics that he played on, where he, like, had the abdomen injury and then didn't look good at all in the Olympics, almost got phased out, Tyrese Halliburton style, and then just wasn't good coming back. that's what we saw this year. Like, that was the version. And maybe he was hurt and we just didn't know. Okay, but you still have had 2 years like that out of the last 3. Like, the swing for Milwaukee here is if Dame is still Dame, you can win a title. Dame and
Yep.
Giannis, I don't really give a rip what else is on the roster. You can win a title. If Dame is not still Dame, and he's the thing we've seen 2 of the last 3 years, Dame now becomes the reason Giannis leaves, because this
Yeah.
is what that deal represents, especially as Chris Middleton and Brooke and Bobby all age and continue. Like, those bad contracts are now off the list just because they're near the end. But like, this is what is replacing it now. And I get it. If you're Milwaukee, like, all that you care is that you got Dame and Giannis signed the extension and you still got him and you're taking a swing for the title. I get it. Nonetheless, there is considerable downside here if he is only what we saw last year.
Yeah, and I think this goes into the analysis of you're saying, like, look, when we look at this contract, it's not great right now. Like, he doesn't look like he deserves this type of money. And like, when you try to blend some of the other factors in, that's bringing like the personal aspect, that's bringing the team building, that's bringing the sport aspect of it. And it's like, hey, yeah, like, we're gonna overpay Dame, but it means that we're gonna have Giannis for another 3 years. You're like, you have to do it because like you're Milwaukee. Like, let's not let's not like say anything else about it, but like, you're not going out and getting a ton of superstars in Milwaukee. It's just not happening unless they're homegrown. So if you're gonna lose Giannis, and like, this is the move you have to make, you make the deal. The question, I guess, from like a team building perspective was like, well, like, were they not just fine when they had Drew Holiday? Like, could they not have gone out and got somebody else? Like, and then he obviously goes to the Boston Celtics and then they go win a title. When you look at Zach LaVine, I think the point that you raised about DeRozan not being there is particularly interesting because LaVine did seem to be on like a positive trajectory. And then they bring in like a usage monster that condenses, honestly, the spacing on the court. When you look at LaVine, do you think that his future is in Chicago, or is it really one of those situations where it's like, hey, like, this has been messy, he probably needs to go somewhere else?
Yeah, I think the latter probably. I think really my fear as a Chicago Bulls fan who expects the worst at all times is I actually think that like the team has clearly finally moved toward a future outlook, like the move of moving on from Caruso to bring in Josh Giddey.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mind that. Like, you didn't get a draft pick out of it, but like, Giddey looked really good down the stretch, played pretty well in the Olympics.
Yeah.
Like, that's a young potential all-star point guard for the team that like I think clearly has the limitations, but is a guy that significantly raises your floor in the regular season, which if you're the Bulls, that's the part of the year you're talking about right now. Like, to me, I think actually that move and LaVine being better this year and just playing more games might offset losing DeMar and losing Caruso. And like, I don't know if I'm right about Zach and about Giddey. I'm not sure this team is really quite a tanking team yet. Like, I think that they're still kind of just like, like they're like fringe play-in range more than Wizards range.
But that's classic Bulls.
Yeah, it is classic Bulls, like the treadmill of mediocrity, just where the team loves to live. And like, frankly, if they're in that range, they're going to go for the play-in because they got to sell the one-game play-in ticket that they need to have there too.
Except it'll be on the road.
Yeah, like I think you hope as a Bulls fan and just as an NBA fan, I think you hope Zach plays well. And then like that's a dude that like is destined for LA. Like either one of the LA teams, to have Zach come in and be your third star on that team, money. Sign me up. That's where I want. Like healthy Zach, playing off the ball, spacing, attacking,
shooting,
extra space. Now that you've got the other stars opposite him that are not DeMar kind of eating up the space quite as much as well. Now I think Zach LaVine can be like a title swing factor, healthy on the right team. And I think this deal's still an overpay, but not quite so much. And further down the list or off the list at that point. So yeah, like that's kind of what we're looking at with these guys on the list. Where it's like, well, they're good players. Everyone here is a good player, but we got to have the list somewhere. The two guys next on the list, third and second, I think are not super surprising names. So I don't know if we even need to go too long on these two names here. That you can listen to them on all the worst contracts lists. So
you're always on these lists.
Yeah, third is my guy Karl Anthony Towns. 4 years still left in the deal, $220 million. with the player option on the end that he will be picking up. I'll break the news for you right now. That will be picked up. And then second, Bradley Beal, down only 3 years left, but still $161 million. Again, a player option that he's going to pick up. I have both of those contracts as a marginal cost to their team of $85 million over the next few years. I don't know, maybe Beal's deal is shorter, so maybe that should be one spot lower. They at least get off of it earlier.
He's got
the no trade clause, and that's the problem with him as well. Like, to me, again, good players being played like elite players. I think they could be great players, but not in the teams that they're on. Towns is playing the 4. The whole point of Towns is to play the 5 and stretch the defense out, and like you're losing what he gives up defensively, but you're adding his value offensively. Well, now they've nuked the value offensively by taking away those matchups, and like he's got a little better defensively, but it's not making up for what they've lost there. So his value is way less. They literally gave him the All-NBA max deal as a center and then traded for Gobert like 3 days later and nuked the value.
Insane. Absolutely
Beal is just like everything Beal does when the Suns are healthy. Literally everything Brad Beal does makes your team worse because it's something that either Devin Booker or Kevin Durant is not doing. I just want them to do all the things that Brad Beal wants to do instead. I thought he was an actively damaging player in the playoffs and the short run that they did have. He was so bad, and he's just not staying healthy, and you can't move on. Like if the Suns thing goes poorly or Kevin Durant, God forbid Kevin Durant wants out of an NBA team. Never seen that before. If they not keeping the team together, one of them's got to go. You got to trade Durant or Booker now because you can't move Bradley Beal. Nobody else is taking on this contract. So that's Towns, that's Beal. I guess I said more than I need to say on them, but well, what else you got to add on Cat or Beal here?
No, they both are just on albatross contracts. I think that Cat obviously has the best ability to outperform this, but like he has to get traded. Like I don't really see a scenario that he can return enough value in Minnesota. Like we just watched him in the playoffs, and the spacing was fine-ish, like, but he just commits a lot of fouls, and then like it screws up your rotations because you're paying 3 centers. So it's really tough for Minnesota. I want to move to our number 1 guy on the list. We haven't heard this name yet. He was number 1 on the list last year. Who's number 1?
Got to be Jaylen Brown. 5 years, $285 million for. It's good that it's 5 years because he's the number 5 player on the Celtics starting lineup also. So I like that. Look, we've done a lot of Jaylen Brown conversation. I think you and I have talked about him on Cash That. We obviously talked about him on the worst deals last year. This is, I will say to his credit, this is a spot where I think on another team he would be a little bit more valuable. Yeah. I think that he is sacrificing a bit for the team. He's been a leader, a guy that the players want to have around on the team. He is an NBA champion. He was a Finals MVP and a Conference Finals MVP that I would not have even considered for either one of them. But flags fly forever, and so do trophies. Like you got to keep those in your case the rest of your life now. Good job, my man. Here's where I rank Jaylen Brown on my list of forwards as I kind of compared my all NBA list. So let me give you the names that I've got just right around Jaylen Brown in my forwards list comparatively. Brandon Ingram, Jalen Johnson, Franz Wagner, Chris Middleton, Tobias Harris, and then Jaylen Brown right in the middle of that group. Now, that is egregiously unfair. He's clearly a better player than those guys, but based on what he is giving the team right now, this past year, that is about where I have him. And to pay him what I don't remember if it is anymore, but at the time was the richest deal in NBA history, is an absurd overpay for a guy that I honestly, genuinely think is the least important of the Celtics 5 starters. Now, it is an incredible Celtics starting 5. That's why they're the champions. I think they're the champions not because of number 1, but because 3, 4, 5 are all that good on the team. But what he does on the team, what he contributes to them, just isn't worth this huge dollar amount. I have his value to the team marginal cost as at least $120 million for the next 5 years. That is, I'm doing the math out of my head, $24 million a year, not of just Jaylen Brown cost, $24 million per year too much. Like, that is nearly a max player too much that you're paying additionally to have Jaylen Brown on the team, and not to have this just be a dump fest at Jaylen Brown. The reason this matters, the Celtics are champions. The Celtics are going to show up in my best contracts list. I got Celtics green on today. We're celebrating Celtics. Jaylen Brown, because of this deal, the Celtics as we know them are only going to be those Celtics for like 2 more years at the most, because Jaylen on this deal, Jason Tatum on his max deal, that's only going to get more. They're going to reach a point sooner than it seems to you that either you get to keep Brown and Tatum, the Jays, and don't have any of the other 3-4 guys, and you have to figure it out, and you have a 2-man team, and we've seen lots of those teams fail in recent years. Or Jaylen's got to go. Tatum clearly is the guy. You keep him, you move Jaylen, and probably that's what Brad Stevens does. And in credit to the Celtics, that's my real Finals MVP. Like, Brad will probably just solve the problem. Jaylen is not an untradeable contract because I think other NBA teams also overvalue him and want him on their team. But like, imagine what your team is in the NBA if this is your number one. I don't think that's going to go well for you. And to the tune of like, I don't know if that you are much more than even like a play-in contender. And even that depends on the rest of the roster. So I don't know, man. Like, Jaylen Brown, I don't think Jaylen Brown is even like, I think people would assume without making a list that he's like a top 15 player. I don't think that he even has a real case for like top 25 or 30 player. And I would have him much further down my list doing that. I said a lot of terrible things about Jaylen Brown. Help me out. What do you got to say about my guy?
I mean, look, I think that when you look at the contract, I think it's obviously one of the biggest. It was the biggest in NBA history at the time of the signing. It still is, I think, the second biggest in terms of total value after Tatum. Tatum is over $300 million for his contract, right? So it does become tough, but I think it goes into the conversation of like, all right, well, like, if you overpay, you better win, and that's what Boston did. So I think it becomes acceptable because they won. Granted, they didn't have to because it was an extension that I guess is about to start. But obviously then it gets like he's disgruntled, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that a lot of these deals, people, teams, like organizations, fans can get past if you win and if you win a title. And I think that it's sometimes like these bad contracts. As you know, we have some teams that don't have bad contracts, but then also it's like we laud like the Presties or the Morys or whatever, but like Presti hasn't won. So you look at it and you're like, okay, like sometimes you do have to make that decision. And I think it does become one of those balancing acts. It's like, hey, like, you're the Boston Celtics. You are like one of the premier organizations in the NBA. Like, you go out, you win titles. You're the Oklahoma City Thunder. You're like, hey, like, we're glad we're in the conversation. It's a different analysis for how you can run the team, I think, too. So it's not really even about Jaylen. It's more about what the organizational expectations are. And when you're the Boston Celtics and you're expected to win, you're expected to put up trophies, I think it does change the analysis of like how you have to run the team. But then you also do have those like super downward risks of like, hey, this might not go well in a couple of years. It's going to be a problem. I don't know how we deal with it, but like, we'll worry about it later. And I think Boston's actually gotten to a point where they're so expensive to keep together. That's part of why you're talking about the Boston Celtics being for sale. Just because it's like, hey, and I think that's also why ownership right now has basically been like, fuck it. It's not our problem. Like, let's go win a title before we get out of here. And like, we'll sell the team and it's going to be literally somebody else's problem. And that changes some of the analysis here too. So it's tough for Jaylen, but at least, you know, he's a finals MVP, won the finals. And you know, I don't think that there'd be any Celtics fan that says like, it wasn't worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You got the banner. That's what you wanted. Before the contract even kicked in, you already got the reward that you're hoping for. And certainly, like, I think the Celtics would be foolish to accept that. Had you gone back in time a year ago and said, you're going to have to take on a bad contract and the team is going to win one championship and that's it, I think from where the Celtics were at, that's actually a bad scenario. Like one championship would be a disappointing outcome. Like that's crazy. As a Minnesota and Chicago area sports fan, give me one championship. Like you could have the rest of my life of fandom for some of these teams. But I think for where the Celtics are at, like one would be a disappointment. I think that's the problem. You got the one, you credit for the one. He's great. He was really good in the playoffs. He had big moments. Everyone on their team did. But hopefully you win more. And I think that that's the problem here is that I think his deal hamstrings them soon and down the line as Al Horford is going to be set to retire, as the Porzingis deal, contract moves away. Drew Holiday's only getting older. Like Brad Stevens and their team has done a great job developing and bringing in the right guys, but there are only so many Derek Whites to trade for on the market out there. You can't just keep adding that forever, and eventually, like, the chickens come home to roost on this one. So I think this is a longer, bigger picture term looking decision on Jaylen Brown. And I just think that with this deal, it's going to be a matter of when, not if, that we see Jaylen Brown wearing other colors, because I think that's where this is going to end up headed. But, for now, you get the trophies, team and individual, so can't be too upset about it.
Yeah, so that's the top 10 list of the worst contracts in the NBA, headlined by Jaylen Brown, Bradley Beal, Karl Anthony Towns, Zach LaVine, Damian Lillard, OG Anunoby, Bam Adebayo, Devin Booker, Jordan Poole, and Patrick Williams. Brandon, it was a pleasure having you on. Stay tuned for the best contracts in the NBA in the next episode.